here. Okay, that's good. And that's good. All right. That about sums up the whole year, Avram. Hi. But we're at the end of a long year. And boy, this has been a year. Wow. One more week to go, and we can say we survived 2020, a historic year. We wish it wasn't so historic, but it is. We'll see what the next. Well, actually, I shouldn't say 2020. The end of 5780. That's what I should say. Sorry about that. 5780. We're ramping it up. So welcome, everyone. And this is our last Friday Zoom, simply because the time is not permitting anymore, because it's getting earlier and earlier. I do want to mention Monday evening, we are going to be having Rabbi Label Wolf give a Zoom talk. Please register when you get your next email if you haven't yet. We have a nice attendance already. He is fantastic. He is unique. He has a very, very unique and special message about turning fear and anxiety into faith and, I'm trying to remember now. Anybody? Faith and positivity, something to that effect. So it's 8 p.m. on Monday night. Hopefully you'll be able to join us there. And I do hope that I'll be able to send out a Rosh Hashanah message to everyone, probably a video sometime next week. I'm hoping to be able to get to that because I know many of us will not see each other on Rosh Hashanah. So at least we'll be with each other in spirit and inspiration. So here we are a week before Rosh Hashanah, exactly 1 week before. This time next week, we're going to be just minutes before the beginning of Rosh Hashanah, a new year. A new year carries enormous, enormous potential because it is a new year. New means we have newness that is made available to us. That means we can have new health. We can have new happiness. We can have new livelihood. Everything coming new because on Rosh Hashanah, we know that God's called the Rosh, the head of the year, because it is that day that God decides how our year is going to be in the coming year. And this is the reason why we have a very interesting customs. And the customs are that we eat special foods on Rosh Hashanah, which are symbolic. And the symbolism actually connects us to what it is that we are, it helps us focus on what it is that we are supposed to focus on Rosh Hashanah. There are many foods that people eat on Rosh Hashanah as a symbolism, but the three most common foods that pretty much everyone eats are apples and honey. Everyone knows about that, which is a symbol of sweetness, honey sweetness. You don't need an explanation or a lecture on that. A pomegranate, because pomegranates are filled with seeds. And so that is symbolic of us having a year filled with mitzvos, like a pomegranate is filled with seeds. And then you have the head of a fish, of course. That's the favorite part of the fish. I'm sure you'll always go for that part. We eat just a tiny piece from the head of a fish, symbolic of our year being for the head and not for the tail. Essentially, we should always be on the best, in the best of things, not at the rear end of things. Now, there are other foods that people eat. Some people eat dates because the word timarim means to timarim sheyitamu seinenu. It alludes to the word that our enemies should expire. Some people eat beets because selek sheyistalku oivenu, that it alludes to the word that our enemies yistalku, selek, that they should be moved away, taken away. Some people eat lettuce because lettuce in Hebrew is karsi, and karsi is sheyichursusanenu. It means to cut, that our enemies should be cut off. But what's interesting is that the three foods that are most widely observed are only the apple and honey, the pomegranate, and the head of the fish. And what's interesting also is that the Chabad custom is to eat those three foods. We don't have the custom of eating all of the other foods. And if I were to ask my mother, she would say, "You forgot Simis. Simis. What's Rosh Hashanah without Simis?" Right? Because Simis has carrots, and in Yiddish, carrots is merin, and that alludes to more. But why, in fact, is it? What is the difference between these three that have a greater grip on observance by Jewish people as opposed to all of the others? And one of the unique differences is that these three, the very food themselves, express the symbolism that we're looking for. Honey is sweet. A pomegranate is filled with seeds. We want to be filled with mitzvahs. The head of a fish, it is the head of the body, not the tail of the body. It's all right there. When you talk about a date, the fruit in and of itself doesn't tell you anything. It's that a date in Hebrew means, and it sounds similar to another word, so therefore we say it. Beets in Hebrew, that word is similar to another word which alludes to something. That's one of the differences between these groups. But there's another reason. There's another reason as well, and the other reason as well brings us to a story in the Talmud. The story in the Talmud is that there were two students who came to the great sage Hillel. Two of Hillel's students. They came to him and they asked him a question. One of his students was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who became the leader of the Sanhedrin, which is the most prominent position you can have amongst the Jewish people. He was the leader, called the Nasi of the Sanhedrin. But this was when he was still a student of Hillel, when Hillel was the Nasi. And he asked Hillel, why is it, there's a law which we're not going to discuss now, but he asked, why is it that when someone is harvesting grapes, they need to make sure that they are spiritually, ritually pure, in a state of purity? Whereas when someone harvests olives, they do not have to be in a state of ritual purity. That means sometimes someone is ritually impure and you have to actually go to a mikvah. That's what you got to do. So, and that makes you ritually and spiritually pure. So when you harvest grapes, there's a law that you have to be ritually pure for whatever reason. So he asked this question to Hillel. He said, why is it that when you harvest grapes, you have to be ritually pure, and when you harvest olives, you don't have to be ritually pure? One of his other students, the Talmud doesn't mention the other student's name, and you'll understand why in a second. The other student said, my teacher, Hillel, my master, I have a question. Why is it that when someone harvests grapes, they have to be ritually pure, and when someone harvests olives, they can be impure? Do you hear the subtle difference between the way the two asked the question? One said, why can you be impure? And one said, why don't you have to be spiritually pure? One used a negative language that you can be spiritually impure. The other one said, why don't you have to be spiritually? He wouldn't use the negative language. And when Hillel heard both of them ask the question, you know what he said? He said, this one, referring to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, will one day be the leader of the Jewish people. And that is exactly what happened. Why? Why did he say that? What did he hear in the subtlety of the question? He heard Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai being a careful, it was sort of natural to him that when he spoke, he always reflected the positive side of what he was talking about. He always saw the positive. Here's the thing. When we speak the positive, we actually bring about the positive. This may sound like good self-help hype, but it's actually taught in Torah, and the Maggid of Mizrich actually writes this in his book, Maggid of Yaakov, where he says that when someone says words, they bring a reality which has maybe yet still remains in a spiritual state. He brings it down into a state in this world of actuality because you verbalized it. That's the reason why using certain harsh language is actually more negative than we realize, or as the Baal Shem Tov once taught. The Baal Shem Tov once taught his students. He once heard this. The Rebbe quotes this in the Hayom Yom, that the Baal Shem Tov was once standing in his beis medrash in his shul, and he heard one Jew say to another Jew, got very angry at a fellow Jew, and he said, "I'm going to rip you apart like a fish." I'm not sure what a fish had to do with it, but whatever. He said, "I'm going to rip you apart like a fish." So the Baal Shem Tov called his students. He had a select, exclusive group of students called the Chevraya Kadisha, the Holy Brotherhood, because they were all very holy men. They were very advanced, godly men. And he told all of them, put your hands on each other's shoulders. And after they were all holding each other's shoulders, the Baal Shem Tov completed the circle by putting his hands on the shoulders of the two students next to him. And he told them all, close your eyes. They closed their eyes, and suddenly they started screaming. The students started screaming. Why did they start screaming? Because when they closed their eyes, they suddenly saw this Jew on high, so to speak, in a spiritual vision, ripping apart the other Jew. And then they opened up their eyes, and the Baal Shem Tov said, you see that everything someone says in this world actually manifests in some way somewhere. Words are actually so powerful. And we all know this because God created the world with speech. And Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of the sixth day of creation when God created man. So the way we speak is very, very significant. That's the reason why apples and honey, what do we say? That we say a Yehi Ratzon, a special prayer when we dip the apple in honey, that God should bless us with a sweet year, positive message. Pomegranate, we don't say something when we eat the pomegranate, but some do, and they say that God, that Shir B'Zchuyesenu, that we should have many merits, like the seeds in a pomegranate, positive. Head of a fish, that we should be to a head, positive. But all of the other fruits, dates, our enemies should expire. Beets, that our enemies should be removed. Lettuce, that our enemies should be cut off. They're all negative messages, even though they have significance, they have a place, but they are still expressed in a negative manner. And one of the things that we want to make sure of as we begin the new year is we want to make sure that this new year we bring positivity into it. Because part of our mission as being a light unto the nations and shining the light of Hashem into the world is by living consciously with the awareness of Hashem and having a much more positive attitude. This is the reason why in Israel, if you want to go to a hospital, you say you want to go to a Beit Cholim. What's a Beit Cholim? A house of the sick. And someone who was building a hospital once came to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, I can't understand why you're calling it a Beit Cholim. You want everyone to come into the hospital, you want to emphasize to them how sick they are. You should call it a Beit Rofim, a house of healing, not a house of sickness. And actually, we started in Shul, I became more careful that when we read the Misha Berach, Brandon pointed this out to me, that when we read the Misha Berach in Shul, that when we read the Misha Berach in Shul that I announced, we are now going to read a prayer of healing for those who need a prayer of healing. Instead of saying we're saying a Misha Berach for those who are sick, we say we are reading a prayer to bring healing, to speak in that positive. That actually makes it more of a difference than we might realize. The Rebbe didn't like to use the word deadline. Dead? What would the Rebbe say? Due date. What's a due date? Right? Who has a due date? A woman who's about to give birth. What's your due date? Oh, a whole new person. Something's being born out of this. What's the due date for when this is going to be born? That is the language that we use. Someone isn't sick, they're not well. Something isn't dirty, it's not clean. The Rebbe also, someone once told the Rebbe that he's engaged in kiruv rechokim. That is a form of a Hebrew terminology for outreach, for Jewish outreach, to inspire other Jews. But if you translate it literally, it means to draw close those who are distant. The Rebbe didn't like that because you are now verbalizing that the other person is distant. And he said, how do you know who's distant? A person can look very religious and be quite distant, and someone can look very secular and be quite close. Some people's neshamas in just a moment, they draw very close to God. Some people do all of the rituals and still they're quite distant from God. This is my blessing to me and to you, that we verbalize, we realize that our words are creation, and that we envision for ourselves, we have to determine, which I will hopefully elaborate on later this week. We have to determine how we want our year to be. And then we have to verbalize that. We have to say, this is how I want my year. This is who I'm going to be this year. Make a determined decision that this is what I'm going to be this year. And speak that positively. That actually assists us enormously. And when Hashem sees our determination, Hashem blesses our efforts. And through our determination and Hashem's blessing, we can actually bring in a new year, which is a very positive and good year. So l'chaim to all of my friends, that this coming year, anyone that needs a blessing of good health, God should shower you with good health. Anyone that needs a blessing for livelihood, God should shower you with abundance. Anyone that needs a blessing for shalom bayis should have an abundance of shalom bayis. Whatever, as we say in Hebrew, kol mishalis libacha, all of the requests of your heart, God should fulfill, but we ask God to fulfill it l'teva, for good. Sometimes we don't actually know what is actually good for us. So we say, God, you definitely know. So make sure that what you give me is the ultimate good that I need in my life. And that's a blessing to each and every one of us. Chaim, everyone, and have a blessed Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was powerful. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And a good Shabbos, Rabbi. Thank you so much.
Good Shabbos, everyone. You are absolutely most welcome. Thank you for joining for all of these weeks. And please stay plugged in with all of our upcoming classes.